Picture this, your own brother, not a rival, not a competitor from another team, your actual blood goes on a nationally streamed podcast and tells the entire NASCAR world that you deserved to be punished, that you got off easy, that you belong in the same doghouse as the guy who just got hit with a $50,000 fine. That is not a hypothetical. That is exactly what happened to Kyle Busch this week. And the man who said it wasn't some random critic on social media. It was Kurt Busch, the 2004 Cup Series champion, a freshly inducted NASCAR Hall of Famer, Kyle's older brother. And on Monday, Kurt sat down on the Door Bumper Clear podcast and did something that caught almost everyone off guard. He stood on NASCAR's side instead of his little brother's. To fully understand why this moment is so significant, you have to go back 2 weeks to Texas Motor Speedway, because that's where the fuse got lit on everything that followed. 2 separate wrecks happened at Texas within a few laps of each other. Both involved a car getting into another car. Both sent a driver spinning. Same type of incident, same kind of outcome on track, but the penalties that followed were about as far apart as you can get. The first incident involved Kyle Busch and John Hunter Nemechek. It happened on a restart with both cars battling for 12th place. Not a winning position, not a playoff tiebreaker moment, just 2 drivers going at it in the middle of the running order. Kyle made contact with Nemechek and sent the Legacy Motor Club Toyota spinning across the racing surface. The replay circulated almost immediately. Fans watched it frame by frame. A significant portion of the NASCAR audience looked at that footage and reached the same conclusion. That move was not a racing accident. Social media was loud about it. Some people went straight to calling for a suspension. The second incident came a few laps later. Ryan Preece and Ty Gibbs got together. Gibbs spun off the nose of Preece's car, and Preece made no secret afterward about his intentions. He said flat out that he was done giving Gibbs any grace based on how their history had been playing out on the track. He wasn't hiding it, he wasn't spinning it. He told anyone who would listen that he had made a choice. 2 wrecks, 2 drivers punished by the laws of physics. Same race, same afternoon, same basic category of incident, but the penalties that came down from NASCAR were completely different. Ryan Preece got a $50,000 fine and lost 25 championship points. Kyle Busch received a warning, no fine, no points deducted. He walked out of the NASCAR hauler essentially untouched. The explanation NASCAR gave came down to radio communication. Before Preece made contact with Gibbs, he told his team over the radio that when he caught back up to Gibbs, he was finished being patient. That statement, in NASCAR's view, established intent. It proved he meant to do it. Kyle Busch never said anything comparable before getting into Nemechek. There was no radio call that officials could point to as evidence of premeditation. Without that, NASCAR determined they couldn't prove deliberate intent, so no penalty was issued beyond the warning. That reasoning didn't land well with a large portion of the fanbase, and the most unexpected person to push back on it turned out to be someone sitting inside the Busch family. Kurt was a guest on Door Bumper Clear on Monday when the hosts brought it up. He didn't sidestep it, he went straight at it. His position was clear. NASCAR's current framework for determining intent is flawed. Basing punishment primarily on what a driver says over the radio creates a system where the outcome of an investigation depends more on self-control than the actual action committed on track. Kurt called it the eyeball test. His argument was simple. NASCAR officials have eyes. They have replay technology. They have camera angles from every conceivable position on that racetrack. They should be capable of watching footage of a contact situation and forming a judgment about whether it looked accidental or deliberate without needing a driver to verbally confess over a team frequency. He talked about how the radio standard turns what should be a straightforward officiating decision into something closer to a legal proceeding. You end up parsing individual words and debating tense and phrasing. One word changed in a sentence can flip the entire outcome. That's not how a sport is supposed to operate when it comes to on-track discipline. But then Kurt went somewhere nobody expected him to go. He stopped criticizing the rule in general and started applying it specifically to his own family. He said what his brother did to John Hunter Nemechek at Texas was the same thing Preece did to Gibbs, the same category of incident, and he said without any hesitation, without hedging, that both drivers deserved to be in the same doghouse. His exact point was that he had no problem saying it publicly. Both should have faced consequences, Kyle included. Let that sit for a moment. A Hall of Fame driver, an older brother, going on a public platform and saying his 2-time Cup Series champion sibling got a pass he shouldn't have received. That is not a common occurrence in any sport, let alone one where family loyalty tends to run as deep as it does in NASCAR. To give Kurt his full credit here, his target wasn't Kyle personally. He wasn't trying to damage his brother or create a family feud for public consumption. His frustration was directed squarely at a system he believes is producing inconsistent results. The problem in his view is that 2 drivers can commit functional functionally identical acts on a racetrack and receive wildly different consequences based purely on whether one of them happened to say something incriminating before the contact happened. That's what bothered him. Kyle was just the unfortunate example that illustrated it most clearly. And then Kurt pulled out a story from his own career that made his position impossible to argue with. He went back to an all-star race. He believed it was 2002, around the time Dale Earnhardt Jr. or Ryan Newman won the event. Kurt needed a caution late in the race. His team needed fresh tires and one more opportunity to contend for the win, so he made a decision. He drove into Robbie Gordon on purpose to bring out the yellow. Calculated, deliberate, a move he made with full awareness of what he was doing. The critical detail, he said nothing about it on his radio, not a word. He kept completely quiet. The caution came out, his team got the tires, he still couldn't catch the leaders and the race ended without him in victory lane. And because he stayed silent on the radio, NASCAR had nothing to act on. The wreck itself left no trail they could follow. Then, 2 days later, Kurt went on a morning radio show. He was tired, he was caught off guard by the question, and he told the truth. He said, yeah, he wrecked Robbie Gordon because he needed a yellow. Just like that, the whole picture changed. By Wednesday, NASCAR had a penalty ready. Kurt remembers it as a $100,000 fine and points removed. The actual records show it was $10,000 and a probation period. The All-Star race carries no championship points, so there were none to deduct. The number may have grown in his memory over the years, but the experience didn't. The fine stung, the probation stung, and Richard Childress, whose organization ran Robbie Gordon's car, reportedly wanted to settle things in a considerably more physical manner before the week was out. The entire punishment came from Kurt talking, not from the wreck. The wreck itself was unprovable without his own words. The moment he opened his mouth on that radio show, he handed NASCAR everything they needed. He learned that lesson the hard way, and he's been carrying it ever since. Which makes his frustration with the current system completely understandable, because Kyle Busch did essentially what Kurt did at that All-Star race. He made contact with another driver, he kept quiet about it on the radio, and he walked away with nothing more than a warning. The system rewarded silence exactly the way it rewarded Kurt's silence back in 2002, until Kurt ruined it himself by telling the truth. The broader issue Kurt is touching on connects to a larger problem that NASCAR is actively grappling with right now. Fans have been raising the inconsistency complaint for multiple seasons. The Priest situation brought it to a boiling point because the replays of both Texas incidents were right there for anyone to compare side by side. They looked similar, the outcomes were completely different. That gap is hard to explain to a fan base that's watching carefully and keeping score. NASCAR's own managing director for racing communications, Mike Ford, acknowledged the situation on the Hauler Talk podcast. He said the benefit of the doubt is running out and that these conversations need to happen less frequently. That's NASCAR's own representative essentially putting a timer on how much patience remains for Kyle Busch's pattern of close calls without consequences. Because Texas wasn't the only example this season. At Bristol earlier in the year, Riley Herbst spun Kyle out. Later in that same race, Kyle appeared to return the favor. Fans saw it as retaliation. NASCAR reviewed it and found nothing worth penalizing. Same result, Kyle walks. The pattern keeps building. Each time it happens, the explanation becomes slightly harder to sell to a fan base that's watching carefully and keeping score. The genuinely strange part of this whole week is that while his brother was publicly saying he deserved punishment and NASCAR's own communications director is sounding quiet alarms, Kyle Busch went out at Watkins Glen and had one of his better days of the season. He picked up a top 10 finish, his second in the last 2 weeks. The on-track performance is trending upward right when everything off the track is pointing his direction. So here's the full picture. Kyle Busch made contact with John Hunter Nemechek at Texas, said nothing on his radio, and received a warning. Ryan Preece made similar contact with Ty Gibbs, said something on his radio before doing it, and lost $50,000 and 25 championship points. Kurt Busch, Hall of Famer, older brother, man who learned this lesson firsthand 2 decades ago, went on a podcast and said Kyle should have been punished right alongside Preece. And NASCAR's own communications director is publicly acknowledging that the benefit of the doubt has limits. The question that's going to follow this sport into the next several race weekends is a straightforward one. If 2 wrecks look the same, and one driver gets fined while the other goes free, and the only difference between them is what one guy said on a radio, is that a discipline system built on fairness? Or is it a system that accidentally teaches drivers that the golden rule isn't don't wreck people, it's don't talk about it afterwards?